In my 7 minutes, I'd like to answer very quickly with one slide the questions that are in the outline of the agenda for this section. The first one was all about competition in innovation products and services. And I have a simple lesson that I've learned with the companies that I've worked for, which is very quickly have products and services in your category that you hate and products and services in your category that you love. I'm going to give you 3 examples. The first one is I was lucky to work for Sony for 9 years. During my time at Sony, my responsibility was launching new products and services into the European market, all of which had no prior experience. So to give you an example, I launched digital still cameras for Sony, and in this particular example, I was a member of the team that launched the VAIO laptops. For a category that was totally new, Sony had not created laptops before, there was an immediate culture within the product launch team of which is the kind of company that our customers know that we do not wish to be associated with, and what kind of company do we want to begin to be associated with and then compete with. At the time that the VAIO laptops were launched, Sony did not want to come across like HP. HP was a very established company that sold the majority of its products business to business, but they had quite a degree of success in business to consumer. And Sony took very specific steps in every part of the marketing mix: product design, price performance, pricing at retail, advertising, etc., to make sure that it didn't come across that way. And you can imagine at the time, Sony was aspiring to Apple. Now, at the time, Apple was having a bit of difficulty, and there was even rumors that Sony was going to buy Apple. People forget that there was a time when Apple had difficulty. But nevertheless, Sony saw that the direction that Apple was going in to bring computing products to consumers was something that they could aspire to. The second example I wish to give you is Samsung. I advised Samsung how to reach to the #1 spot in Northern Europe. The board of Samsung tasked my team and I to be #1 in 3 categories: phones, TVs, and cameras within 5 years. That was the objective. The company, and obviously this was based on my experience at Sony, very quickly wanted to push away from, and learn from 2 different organizations. The first one, and this exists to this day, is Samsung hates Apple. And I suspect that hatred also extends to people who have a Samsung phone or an Apple phone. I've learned very quickly never to raise which is a better phone at a dinner party, because you know that the conversation will get quite intense. And you can see that right from the beginning, Samsung wanted to know in detail every aspect of what Apple is doing, and they ensured that I had the resources to make sure that at least we would do the same better. The purpose was not to copy, but at least to try and do better. Now, the second one might surprise you. Bang & Olufsen, for many years, was considered the best audiovisual product in the market. Samsung was not interested in Bang & Olufsen per se, but they were fascinated by Scandinavian design. For 5 years, regularly, every quarter, one of my roles was to host some of the most senior people in Samsung, all the way down to product managers and designers, a tour of Scandinavia so that they could understand how Scandinavians design their products. Now, Bang & Olufsen is an electronics product, but they wanted to see absolutely everything. In my workshop later, I'll actually be going through the process that they use to examine Scandinavian culture, design culture, and bring that into their products. Now, I might add, this is worth researching. I've mentioned Apple twice. Is Apple just on top? Is Apple the kind of culture that they just do their own thing? I highly recommend that you have a look at Steve Jobs' relationship with Japan. There are many articles online about how Steve Jobs, before Apple became a success, would make field trips to Japan to learn everything about Japanese design culture, and he even became close friends with my boss when I was at Sony, to the extent that they would both talk about product management, product development. One of the next things which actually surprised me a little bit in the agenda is this idea of how do you manage innovation. Out of my few slides, this is the most important one. It is very, very important in the context, I would actually suggest critical, in the context of Vision 2030, that everyone understands the difference between managing a process and leading a process. It is extremely easy to confuse the two, and it's extremely easy to suggest that if you manage something well, that you will leapfrog ahead of your competitors. As a simple definition, I would say management is all about metrics. It is all about taking the best case studies for the execution of a product or service and making sure that you apply them in the same way. But that will not help you leapfrog your innovation beyond what is the best in the world. Now, as was mentioned, I'm a graduate of the INSEAD Business School, and I've taught innovation there as well. We have an expression that is taught to every MBA graduate of INSEAD, and that is that you have to have faith in uncertainty. What this means is that if you are going to lead on innovation, you will not have statistics, you will not have metrics, you will not have case studies of existing execution. You will have to come up with a vision of where you wish to go, which hopefully in retrospect, people will look at and say, wow, they were just like Steve Jobs. But at this point in time, there is no certainty. So when I say this is my most important slide, the difference between management and leadership, is that as we are looking, as the kingdom is looking at all the different techniques of innovation around the world, it is appropriate that the best techniques are brought to this kingdom. But that is very different than having the leadership to go beyond it. And that brings me to my last slide, which is one of the questions was about how do you foster innovation, how do you foster creativity? Now, I did projects for car companies in Germany. It would be perfectly appropriate for everyone to learn about the innovation processes in that part of Germany. It is appropriate that we learn about innovation and creativity processes in a place like Silicon Valley. However, what is very interesting for me is what are the inherent creativity processes in the culture here. I have just come to Riyadh after spending 3 weeks in Tokyo. In those 3 weeks, on a daily basis, I was looking at creativity in different product categories, whether it be electronics or fashion or architecture or whatever. And I was basically doing a mini Steve Jobs tour. I would like to come to this kingdom and see all the different creativity and innovation methods in all kinds of different areas. Because regardless of which category you look at, electronics in Silicon Valley or cars in Germany, you can see an absolute link between the innovation processes in those categories and the fundamental creativity of the culture that they come from. That's it. I will now hand over.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anand.